Father set up a martial arts tournament to choose my husband, and my childhood sweetheart, always so skilled in combat, lost to a beggar from the streets. The crowd erupted in chaos, waves of laughter surging forth. The county mistress, reduced to marrying a beggar. My elder brother, burning with fury, pointed at my childhood sweetheart. Just now, you were clearly holding back your strength. Why did you deliberately lose? Xia Zhaoyan slowly lifted his eyes. I am simply outmatched. A loss is a loss. Where does deliberate come into it? When our eyes met, the look he gave me was distant, utterly removed. In that single glance, I knew he had also been reborn. So in this life, Xia Zhaoyan no longer wished to marry me. If that was the case, then why should I keep clinging to him? The next second, I raised my hand, pointing at that beggar, ragged in clothes yet standing tall and straight, and spoke clearly. You won the match. So now you must honor the agreement. At this time next month, come to the Earl's manor to propose. The moment my words fell, as the crowd erupted in shock, a flicker of blankness crossed Xia Zhaoyan's face. Shen Qingli, do you even know what you're saying? I gently smoothed my sleeves, my tone calm and unruffled. Of course I do. He laughed as if he'd heard the most absurd joke, a mocking curl tugging at his lips. You'd marry a beggar just to spite me. I slowly raised my eyes, my gaze settling on that figure upon the stage. The man's long hair was tangled, nearly veiling most of his face. Though his clothes were tattered, they couldn't hide his tall, upright bearing. The next second, my voice rang out clearly across the whole arena. A martial tournament to choose a husband is built on fairness and justice, and the Earl's manor has always prized its reputation above all. I paused briefly, meeting Xia Zhaoyan's unreadable gaze. This young master won the match, so I am bound by the agreement to marry him. Where is the spite in that? A soft click. Xia Zhaoyan turned his wrist, sheathing his sword, then abruptly darkened his expression. Qingli, don't be willful. Your father will never permit such nonsense. I was about to speak when my gaze inadvertently caught a familiar figure beyond the crowd. My half-sister, Shen Shuyu, stood gracefully beneath the corridor, as if merely passing by. But I knew, just as in the previous life, she had only come to confirm whether Xia Zhaoyan had won the match. Almost at the same moment, Xia Zhaoyan spotted her too. The instant their eyes met, the agitation and anger in his gaze, stirred by me just moments before, vanished. Then it was replaced by something indescribable, a blend of tenderness and delight. Seeing this, understanding dawned within me at once. So that's how it is. In a flash, memories from my past life surged forth like a tide. Yes, in the previous life, after Xia Zhaoyan claimed the title of martial champion, the first thing he did was win the tournament my father had set for me, marrying me in grand style. Back then, every noble lady in the capital envied me for winning such a brilliant husband. In the early years of our marriage, we shared moments of mutual respect and devotion. In spring, we admired the flowers. In winter, we watched the snow. He taught me to draw a bow. I ground ink for him. I had believed that such harmony and sweetness would let us grow old together. But in the third year of our marriage, my half-sister Shen Shuyu, who had grown up alongside me, drank poison and ended her life in a single night, leaving behind only a letter addressed to Xia Zhaoyan. Every word of that letter wept blood, every line a confession of love and despair buried too deep to bear. When Xia Zhaoyan read it back then, his expression remained perfectly calm, and he silently held the paper to the candle flame until it burned to ash. Seeing him like that, I thought nothing more of it. Yet within days, ignoring the fact that I was about to give birth, he volunteered to lead troops to the distant frontier. By the time he returned victorious, 2 years had passed. Our child in swaddling clothes had learned to toddle, and when he looked at me, the warmth that once lived in his eyes was gone forever. To be fair, for the 20 years that followed, Xia Zhaoyan remained an irreproachable husband. His career flourished, his brilliance on full display. Because of him, I received noble titles at a young age. He never took a concubine. The manor held only me and our child. In the eyes of the outside world, he respected me, protected me, and gave me every dignity a lawful wife deserved. Even I gradually fell for that illusion, telling myself that even the fiercest love of youth would, by middle age, settle into this kind of courteous calm, until he fell gravely ill at 40. In his final moments, an old friend came to visit, holding his hand and asking if he had any regrets in this life. I stood quietly outside the crimson gauze curtain, holding our child's hand, and heard him, his breath faint, yet every word piercingly clear, lay bare the obsession buried for half a lifetime. I should not have fled from her love, nor should I have won that tournament. As my thoughts slowly returned, I saw Xie Zhaoyan striding toward Shen Shuyu. So in this life, he would rather lose to a beggar before the eyes of the crowd, severing our bond entirely, all to mend the regrets left unfulfilled in his past life. My heart felt as though an ice spike had been driven straight through it. I forced my expression to remain composed, and announced the outcome of the match. Word by word, the tournament is over. The victor has been decided. I, Shen Qingli, will keep my word and marry this young master. The words fell from the viewing stand. My elder brother whipped his gaze toward me, his voice sharp and urgent. Qingli, don't be foolish. He rushed to the front of the stage in a few strides. You are the legitimate daughter of the Earl, a county mistress personally titled by the Emperor. How could you marry some beggar of unknown origin? He whirled toward Xie Zhaoyan, who had remained silent throughout, his face dark as iron. You grew up with my sister. Years ago, you swore before everyone that you would marry no one but her. Today, you didn't give your all, you threw the match on purpose. Are you really going to watch her ruin her life out of spite? At this, Xie Zhaoyan merely lifted his eyes, indifferent. His gaze first swept carelessly over the crowd, then finally landed on my face, his tone flat to the point of coldness. Uncle Shen will never agree to such an absurd marriage. He paused, a faint, barely perceptible sneer curling at the corner of his lips. Besides, this is nothing more than a moment's impulse from the county mistress. She won't really marry that beggar. As his words fell, Shen Shuyu at his side let a slight smile tug at her lips, a barely concealed gleam of triumph flickering in her eyes. Just as my brother was about to say something else, Shen Shuyu, standing nearby, suddenly pressed a delicate hand to her forehead and let her body go limp, toppling backward. Shuyu. Xie Zhaoyan's expression changed in an instant, all traces of his earlier composure vanishing without a trace. Amid the clamor and gasps of the crowd, he caught the feigning Shen Shuyu in his arms by the waist, and strode away without a single backward glance. I stared at his resolute, retreating figure, my heart clenching as if gripped by an invisible hand. The crowd dispersed, leaving nothing but scattered debris around the vast martial platform. I turned, taking a true measure of the man beside me for the first time, the one who had remained silent through it all. His clothes were tattered rags, his tangled hair obscuring his face, revealing only the sharp, clean line of a jaw. I spoke softly. What's your name? By all logic, a man who had just defeated dozens in succession, there was no way I would have no memory of him in my past life. Yet no matter how deeply I searched my memories, I could find not a single trace of him. The man's parched lips parted slightly, and when he spoke, his voice was hoarse yet carried an extraordinary chill. I didn't enter this contest to marry you. Those words left me frozen on the spot. His voice continued, utterly devoid of emotion. Before I came, I heard that Xie Zhao was your childhood sweetheart. My plan was to defeat him publicly, then use 50 taels of silver as the condition to forfeit my right to marry you. I was stunned for a moment, the corner of my mouth twitching uncontrollably. So, you're only in this for the money? Yes. His answer was crisp and clean. A nameless fury surged through me in an instant. I, Shen Qingli, had been raised on poetry and classics since childhood, proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. I wouldn't dare claim my beauty was unmatched under heaven. But my name was known throughout the capital. The men on Chang'an Street who wished to court me could line up from the Vermilion Sparrow Gate all the way to the Mingda Gate, and now I was being scorned by a beggar. Competitiveness and humiliation churned and clashed within me. I let out a cold laugh and had my maid hand me several banknotes, which I flung directly at his chest. Since you won the contest, it's no longer your choice. This 100 taels buys your obedience as my fiancé. The man lowered his gaze to the banknotes fluttering to the ground, his body unmoving, beneath the tangled hair. I could barely make out his expression. All I could hear was a faint, almost imperceptible scoff. The county princess intends to buy me. He slowly lifted his eyes, and through the stray strands of hair, I found myself falling into a pair of eyes as deep as an abyss. There was no greed in them, no servility, only a stretch of silent, dark ink. 100 taels. To buy a beggar as a fiancé. The county princess is quite generous. His low, raspy voice carried an unreadable undertone. The man didn't stoop to pick up the banknotes. Instead, he took a step forward. As he drew closer, a faint, crisp scent of cold pine drifted toward me. It clashed completely with his ragged attire. He leaned down slightly, bringing his lips close to my ear. His voice lowered to barely a whisper. County princess, are you truly willing to marry a beggar like me, a man with nothing to his name? Naturally. You won't regret it. I won't. The air hung still for a single breath. The man seemed to let out a soft laugh, then bent down once more and picked up the banknotes from the ground. As he moved, his worn sleeve slipped down, revealing a lean, sinewy wrist, and across it, a stark, old scar running deep. Under my astonished gaze, he folded the banknotes with unhurried care and gently pressed them back into my hand. Keep this money for yourself, county princess. Just as I expected him to turn and walk away, he spoke again, his voice low. Wait for me. Half a month from now, I will come to the Earl's residence to formally propose. When I returned to the estate, I was met with a furious roar. Unfilial daughter. As the legitimate daughter of the Earl's household, you declared before the whole world that you'd marry a beggar. You've shamed your old man to the bone. My father stood before the hall, hands clasped behind his back, his face ashen with rage. Seeing me lower my gaze in silence, he violently flicked his sleeve and said coldly, Today. Zhao Yan deliberately threw the match, a clear sign he refuses to marry you. Since that's the case, I'll go to the Marquis's residence tomorrow and finalize the marriage between him and your sister. From now on, I'll also find you a proper, respectable husband. I lifted my eyes, offering a smile that didn't reach them. By all means, father, do try. Let's see whether your words carry more weight, or the Empress Dowager's golden promise. He pointed a trembling finger at me, furious beyond words, but suddenly found himself speechless. He was clearly remembering the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet 2 years ago, when I'd thrown myself in front of a blade meant for her, taking the wound myself. Moved by my devotion, she had publicly sworn to grant me one wish, promising that should I ever need it, she would see it fulfilled. So, as long as I refused to relent, Xia Zhaoyan and Shen Shuyu's marriage would never come to pass. From the side, Shen Shuyu chose that moment to begin sobbing, tears streaming down her cheeks, though beneath her tearful eyes churned a bitter, unwilling hatred. Sister, since Brother Ian has no feelings for you, why must you cling so stubbornly and refuse to let us be together? I let out a cold laugh. Let you be together? That's not entirely out of the question. My father had always been a man who valued profit above all else. In my past life, the reason he'd been so pleased with my marriage to Xia Zhaoyan was simply the benefits that came with an alliance with the Marquis's household. Now that Xia Zhaoyan had abandoned me publicly, his value was spent. Given my father's relentlessly self-serving nature, it was all but certain he'd trade me away for whatever new advantage presented itself, handing me off to any Zhang or Li who could bring the family some gain. When it came to my lifelong happiness, in his eyes it probably weighed less than a land deed or a favor owed. At that thought, I turned to him and spoke, each word deliberate. All you need to do is put it in writing, swear that from this day forward, you will never again meddle in my marriage affairs. Whether I marry a rooster, a dog, or a beggar on the street corner, it will have nothing to do with you. Unfilial girl. My father flew into a towering rage, raising his hand to strike me across the face, only for Shen Shuyu to grab hold of him desperately. "Father, please, just agree to sister's request," she pleaded in a tearful voice. Her eyes glistening. "Daughter truly loves brother Ian." The calculation took but a heartbeat. The scales of interest tipped at last, he conceded. The coldness in my heart deepened. Yes, it wasn't until my past life, when I myself became a mother, that I truly understood, there really were fathers in this world who could feel not a shred of love for their own children. A few days later, hearing that the Empress Dowager had fallen gravely ill, I went to the palace to pay her a visit. As dusk settled and I stepped out through the palace gates, a familiar figure blocked my path. The scent of agarwood drifted on the wind. Without even lifting my eyes, I knew exactly who it was. Qingli. Xia Zhaoyan's voice was low, carrying a certainty that could not be mistaken. "You came back too, didn't you?" I kept my eyes lowered, fixed on the trembling pearl embroidery stitched across the toe of my shoe. I gave no answer. He stepped forward, his shadow falling over me. "In our past life, we were married for 20 years. I can honestly say I never treated you with even the slightest neglect. But you know Shuyu was the deepest wound in my heart. So why, in this life, do you insist on clinging to this?" I lifted my head sharply, meeting his somber gaze, and let a faint, mocking curve touch my lips. "Me, clinging to you? There's no need to pretend anymore." His tone was resolute. "You went to the palace today precisely because you wanted to use the favor the Empress Dowager granted you all those years ago, to ask her to decree our marriage, didn't you?" I nearly laughed out loud. "Where do you get such confidence?" Xia Zhaoyan stared at me, then suddenly reached out and seized my wrist. His voice urgent. "I can promise you this, I will bring you into my household just as I did in our past life." He paused, as if steeling himself for a decision. "But the position of principal wife must be reserved for Shuyu. That is what I owe her." I wrenched my hand free from his grip, the last trace of warmth draining from my eyes. "Let me say this to you one final time, who you choose to marry, who you make your principal wife, has absolutely nothing to do with me. In this life, I will never marry you." With that, I turned and boarded the Shen family carriage without looking back. The curtain fell, cutting off the sight of Xia Zhaoyan standing there, words caught in his throat. The carriage rolled forward slowly. I leaned back against the soft cushion, and when my fingertips brushed the corner of my eye, they came away cold and wet. So some pain, even when you are granted a second life, remains carved into your bones. In the past life, because of Shen Shuyu's death, he had insisted on volunteering for the frontier posting even when he knew I was about to give birth. For over 1,000 days and nights, I had sat alone in that vast marquee estate, swallowing countless mouthfuls of bitterness and helplessness. Even on the day I gave birth, when I had one foot through the gates of death, there was no one by my side. All I could do was clench the bedsheet in my fists. The cruel irony was that I had spent half a lifetime managing that household to perfection, and all I got in return was his dying whisper, "I should never have won that duel." The carriage wheels rumbled over the blue stone road, and the sound jolted me from my memories. I wiped away the tears and slowly straightened up. Outside the window, the familiar vermilion gates of the Shen residence came into view, with a maidservant waiting on the steps, lantern in hand. In this life, the nights I had spent awake for Xia Zhaoyan, and the tears I had shed for him, none of them would ever happen again. Once the engagement between Xia Zhaoyan and Shen Shuyu was settled, both households threw themselves into preparations with great urgency. A few days later, Xia Zhaoyan sought me out specifically, saying he planned to take Shuyu to Jiangnan for a short stay. Before departing, he pressed a thick dowry list into my hands. "Shuyu's mother passed away early, just like yours did." His tone was flat, but every word stung like a needle. "Since you are her elder sister, and you have been through marriage yourself, you should take the trouble to see to her arrangements." I was almost too furious to speak. "You want me to personally prepare her dowry? And why, exactly, should I?" Xia Zhaoyan stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze carrying a warning. "If you still harbor any intention of entering the Xia household, then do not make things difficult for Shuyu at every turn." Before he even finished speaking, I lifted my hand and tore the dowry list in two. Shreds of paper fluttered to the ground. Xia Xiaoyan's face darkened, his patience spent. Tomorrow, Shuyu and I depart for Jiangnan. When I return in half a month, if I find you have not made proper arrangements, he turned, robes sweeping through the air, and delivered his final ultimatum. Our engagement is hereby dissolved. Xia Xiaoyan lingered in Jiangnan with Shen Shuyu for a full month before finally setting out on the journey back to the capital. Along the way, misty rain draped over painted bridges, and wind-blown curtains framed emerald views, all the soft, gentle scenery that Jiangnan had to offer. One day, while watching the rain from a boat, Xia Xiaoyan suddenly remembered that in the past life, Shen Qingli had once spoken to him in that same soft, coaxing tone, begging him to travel with her to Jiangnan. But Shuyu had just passed away then, and his heart was cold and dead. He had refused her again and again, citing the pressure of official duties. After that, she never mentioned it again. On the day they departed for the capital, Xia Xiaoyan felt a sudden tightness in his chest, an inexplicable urgency to see Shen Qingli right away. They had grown up together for over a decade. He had to admit, there was still a lingering affection in his heart for her that he could not easily sever. Thinking of how he had spent this past month traveling with Shuyu, leaving her alone in the capital, he knew her temperament well enough to imagine just how deeply she must have been hurt. The moment he returned to the capital, Xia Xiaoyan did not even go back to his own residence. He rode straight for the Shen household. But the moment he stepped through the courtyard gate, the sight before him seized his breath. The hall was draped in red silk, filled with bolts of satin, jewels, and ceremonial gifts. Every single piece was worth a fortune. Xia Xiaoyan froze for a moment, then the corners of his lips slowly lifted. So, Qingli had not only recognized her mistake, she had prepared Shuyu's dowry with such grandeur and thoroughness. He knew. This was her way of bowing her head to him. When Xia Xiaoyan stepped through the gates with Shen Shuyu at his side, I was seated in the main hall, flipping through the account ledgers. Qingli, you have gone to great trouble. Xia Xiaoyan stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the rows of chests that filled the hall. In those usually cold eyes, a rare trace of almost gentle warmth flickered. Beside him, Shen Shuyu could hardly contain the smug satisfaction spreading across her face at the sight of all that splendor. Brother Ian, it seems sister truly took your words to heart. Xia Xiaoyan curled his lips slightly but did not deny it. Shen Shuyu could not wait to step forward. She reached into one of the open chests and drew out a jade hairpin. The pin glowed softly in her fingers, smooth and luminous. She admired it with a soft sigh. Such fine ice jadeite, I have never seen its equal outside the palace. With that, she began to wander among the chests piled high with treasures, inspecting them as if she were already the mistress of this household. I closed the ledger, rose slowly, and stepped between her and the next chest. Shen Shuyu frowned in displeasure, her gaze still drifting longingly toward the chests behind me. Her eyes shimmered with nothing but naked greed. I spoke, without warning. These are not for you. Shen Shuyu's hand froze midair, her expression shifting from smugness to indignation. Shen Qingli, what do you mean by that? Exactly what I said. You. Her face flushed crimson, and her voice turned shrill. I knew you were up to no good. You prepared this dowry for yourself, didn't you? Still trying to shamelessly marry Brother Ian. Xia Xiaoyan stepped forward, brow furrowed. Qingli, what exactly are you trying to say? When his gaze met mine, he instinctively took a step back, as if afraid I might latch onto him. I have already made myself clear. His tone turned heavy, carrying a note of admonishment. If you still wish to enter the Xia family's door, then stop making things difficult for Shuyu. Do your duty as the elder sister and see her dowry properly prepared. I met his gaze, my eyes calm and unruffled, and spoke each word with perfect clarity. Xia Xiaoyan, let me say this one last time as well. I have never once thought of marrying you again. As for these, my gaze swept over the room full of chests and trunks. These are my betrothal gifts. They have nothing to do with you. The air froze solid. After a beat of dead silence, Xia Xiaoyan let out a low chuckle. Betrothal gifts. Shen Qingli. Surely you don't mean to say that these things were sent to you by that beggar from the other day. Meeting that mocking look in his eyes, my fingers curled tight against my palms, and for a moment, I found myself at a loss for words. At dawn yesterday, dozens of servants in dark martial robes had carried these chests to the Shen residence. They said only that these were their master's betrothal gifts. As for his name, they would not say a word. I had a vague premonition that these gifts were somehow tied to that beggar who had won the martial contest that day. But who was he, exactly, to have such means at his disposal? Seeing me falter, Xia Zhaoyan took it as confirmation that he had struck a nerve. His expression immediately turned smug. Qingli, there's a limit to how long you can keep sulking with me. I felt a sudden, profound weariness wash over me. I turned to leave. Every word spent on a man like this was a word wasted. Just then, a servant stepped forward holding a brocade box, speaking with deference. Second miss. This is a dowry item that the master specially selected for you. Shen Shuyu's face lit up with delight. She snatched the box open without a moment's hesitation. The moment I saw the translucent, lustrous white jade bangle inside, all the blood in my body seemed to freeze solid. That was the only keepsake my mother had left behind. Give it back. I lunged forward, but Shen Shuyu darted behind Xia Zhaoyan like a startled rabbit, clutching the jade bangle to her chest, her eyes brimming with tears. Father gave this to me. Surely sister isn't going to snatch it away too. I reached out to pull her out from behind him, but before my fingertips could even brush her sleeve, Xia Zhaoyan shoved me back hard. He stood in front of Shen Shuyu, brows furrowed. It's just a bangle. Shuyu is your sister too. Is this really necessary? I stumbled from the force of his push, nearly falling. Xia Zhaoyan instinctively reached out to steady me, but I had already regained my footing. Seizing the moment his attention wavered, I grabbed Shen Shuyu and yanked her out from behind him. I drew a deep breath, forcing down the fury raging in my chest, and extended my hand before her. Give the bangle back. Shen Shuyu stared at me, a faint, barely perceptible sneer curling at the corner of her lips. Sister, since you want it so badly. With that, she slowly extended the bangle toward me. Just as my fingertips were about to touch it, her fingers loosened, almost imperceptibly. Crack! The jade bangle plummeted straight onto the bluestone floor, shattering into several pieces in an instant. That sharp, brittle sound was like a knife carving straight through my heart. I stared blankly at the scattered fragments of jade on the ground. My mother's face, her voice, her smile, all of it flooded back to me in a single, crushing wave. Rage and grief, immense and overwhelming, drowned every shred of reason. I grabbed Shen Shuyu by the hair and raised my hand again. Enough. My wrist was seized in an iron grip. Xia Zhaoyan's face was dark as thunder, his eyes filled with disappointment and anger. Seeing her chance, Shen Shuyu swung her hand and slapped me clean across the face. The sharp sting exploded across my cheek. My ears rang with a dull buzz. I instinctively pressed my hand to my face, staring at Xia Zhaoyan in disbelief. Tears, purely physical, unbidden, welled up in my eyes without warning, blurring everything in front of me. The moment Xia Zhaoyan saw my red-rimmed, tear-filled eyes, he flinched. Some of his composure crumbled, and he hurriedly released his grip on my wrist. His throat bobbed. His voice came out dry and rough. I didn't mean to. Then, almost on reflex, he stepped forward, reaching out to check my injury, but I shoved him away with all my strength. Get lost. His pride stung. His expression darkened. Whatever flicker of guilt had surfaced a moment ago was instantly replaced by irritation, and he slipped back into that lofty, condescending posture. Qingli, how much longer are you going to keep making a scene? You and Shuyu will both be entering the Xia household soon enough. Are you two going to be at each other's throats every single day? As the elder sister, isn't it only natural that you yield to your younger sister? Fury surged up my chest like a wildfire. I raised my hand to return that slap, when a stern, thunderous shout rang out from behind me. Unfilial daughter! Stop this at once! My father stood there in his court robes, clearly just returned from the morning audience. His face was livid as he pointed at me and Shen Shuyu. Brawling in broad daylight. What is the meaning of this? Shen Qingli, have you no sense of what it means to be the legitimate daughter of this house? I whipped around, my bloodshot eyes boring straight into him. All the grievances and resentment I had buried for years finally erupted. Dignity? And what about you? How dare you hand over my mother's keepsake to the child of your concubine? I pointed at the shattered fragments of the jade bangle on the floor, my voice trembling with unbridled fury. You helped yourself to your dead wife's dowry to fill your bastard daughter's coffers. What kind of head of the household are you? What kind of man? When my words fell, Xia Xiaoyan stood frozen in place, his voice barely a whisper. This is your mother's keepsake. I didn't bother acknowledging him. My gaze remained fixed on my father, burning with hatred. If you so much as touch another one of my mother's belongings, I will not hesitate to take you before the magistrate, unfilial girl. Hold your tongue. It was as if I had struck a raw nerve. He flew into a towering rage and raised his hand, swinging it straight at my face. I closed my eyes, bracing for the blow, but the pain I expected never came. I opened my eyes in shock, and found a tall, straight-backed figure standing before me like a pine tree in the wind. The man slowly turned his head. The moment I took in those deep, dark eyes and that sharp, cold profile, my pupils contracted. I couldn't stop the stunned whisper from escaping my lips. It's you? The man arched an eyebrow at me, a hint of amusement playing at the corner of his mouth. Miss Shen didn't give me 100 taels to come marry you. I'm here to honor that agreement. Absurd. Xia Xiaoyan yanked me behind him, stepping forward to put himself between me and the man. You're that beggar from the other day. Do you have any idea what kind of nonsense you're spouting? Do you honestly believe a man like you can marry the legitimate daughter of an earl's household? Before his words even faded, a muffled thud sounded from the side. My father's face had gone pale as paper, and he had already fallen to his knees in a rigid kneel, his voice trembling beyond recognition. Why, your servant greets the crown prince. What? Crown prince? Xia Xiaoyan's entire body stiffened. Suddenly remembering something, he whipped his head around to look at the man of extraordinary bearing beside him, his voice twisting with shock. You're the fourth prince. Song Sui, the one His Majesty just named heir. Song Sui neither confirmed nor denied it. He only raised an eyebrow slightly. A long breath later, Xia Xiaoyan inhaled deeply, the color draining completely from his face. At last, he bent his knee and knelt, his voice strained. I greet the crown prince. Song Sui paid neither of them any mind. Instead, he walked straight up to me, his long fingers gently lifting my chin. My heart clenched. I instinctively tried to dodge, but the undeniable force in his fingertips held me still. When his thumb brushed against my swollen, burning cheek, I let out a soft hiss of pain. Song Sui's gaze sharpened. The gentle aura around him turned cold and hard in an instant. Next time someone dares to bully you, pay them back double. Understood? Why did those two sentences feel so familiar? I stared at him, dazed, a tangled knot of emotions surging in my chest, vindication, bewilderment, and something deeper I couldn't quite name. The moment Song Sui's gaze swept past, several black-armored guards moved forward like specters. Without a word of explanation, they seized Shen Shuyu and forced her brutally to her knees. No, don't. Father. Brother Ian. Save me. Sharp slaps rang out, interwoven with Shen Shuyu's screams, echoing through the dead-silent courtyard. Xia Xiaoyan lunged to rise, but his father, whose face had gone ashen beside him, clamped down hard on his arm, pinning him in place. It wasn't until I entered the palace to visit the Grand Empress Dowager that day that I learned the truth. It turned out Song Sui was the son of a deceased palace maid. During the emperor's grave illness, he had been sent out of the palace on secret orders, only to be ambushed by assassins dispatched by his own brothers. Severely wounded, he'd been forced to disguise himself as a beggar, hiding his identity and blending into the city streets. The Grand Empress Dowager lay back in her reclining chair, gently holding my hand. That child. The days he spent in the palace back then were harder than you could ever imagine. I can tell he's put real thought into you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have risked exposing his identity that day to win that martial arts tournament for your hand. She suddenly recalled something, and a gentle smile curled at the corners of her lips. Ah, I just remembered, the two of you actually met once when you were children. Her words were like a key, unlocking a long-sealed memory. I suddenly remembered. When I was little, I had gone with my mother to visit the Empress in the palace. In the back garden, beneath the plum trees, I'd happened upon a group of richly dressed children tormenting a scrawny boy. They forced him to kneel by the frozen pond, pelting him with stones. Back then, my mother was still alive. I was cradled in her palm, spoiled beyond all reason, my temperament growing wilder by the day. Seeing that scene, I mimicked the righteous wandering heroes from the storybooks and charged at those children, brawling with them until I drove them off. Then I took off my newly acquired crimson cloak and wrapped it tightly around that boy whose lips had gone blue from the cold. Next time someone dares to bully you, pay them back double. Understood? My chest gave a sudden thump, vibrating through me until I felt numb. So that little boy had been Song Sui. So when he'd appeared on that arena stage that day, it had never been about the 50 taels of silver he claimed. It had been for me. The Grand Empress Dowager's casual sigh let me glimpse the other side of that storm. No wonder the court had been so turbulent lately. Even my ever-smooth father had been walking on eggshells day and night. It turned out the third prince and fifth prince had completely torn each other apart over the succession, both ending up ruined. After the emperor regained consciousness, he'd reflected that the position of crown prince couldn't remain vacant, lest the court destabilize. In the end, he'd pushed Song Sui onto the throne of the heir apparent. In the gilded incense burner, agarwood burned steadily, thin wisps of smoke curling upward. The Grand Empress Dowager traced the rim of her teacup, her gaze seeming to drift carelessly across my face. They say when the clam and the crane fight, it's the fisherman who profits. This still water of the imperial city, if no one casts a stone at the right moment, how could ripples rise powerful enough to stir the whole tide of the times? She smiled faintly, her eyes holding the clarity of one who sees through everything. I knew it. That child, deep down, he's the one most like his father. My heart leaped, and in that instant, I understood, there was no divine coincidence. The struggle that had dragged both princes to ruin, the true hand behind it was likely none other than Song Sui himself, who seemed so aloof from worldly affairs. But these were matters I had no business prying into. I could only lower my gaze, pretending not to grasp the depth of her words, and make my excuses to take my leave in haste. It wasn't until I reached the palace gates that I looked up and saw a familiar figure standing silently by the carriage. Song Sui stood with his hands clasped behind his back, as if he'd known all along I would appear at this very moment. He looked at me, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips, and extended his hand. "I'll take you home." I gazed down at that hand with its well-defined fingers, knowing full well that the man before me was not as gentle as he appeared. He was dangerous, even, but still, against all reason, I placed my hand in his palm. The moment our palms touched, he slid his fingers between mine, interlacing them tightly. Just as I'd imagined, broad, warm, and solid. Suddenly, I wasn't afraid anymore. At least in this moment, I believed that this man standing before me would never hurt me. At the Grand Empress Dowager's birthday banquet, all the officials attended with their families. As a concubine's daughter, Shen Shuyu ordinarily wouldn't have been qualified to attend, but as Xia Zhaoyan's betrothed, she was granted an exception. When the music paused, it was time for the younger generation to perform. Shen Shuyu rose first, draped in a resplendent rainbow gown. She bowed gracefully to the Grand Empress Dowager. "This humble daughter offers a dance to celebrate your grace's birthday." Her gaze swept over Xia Zhaoyan, carrying a pride of certain victory. But not long into her dance, perhaps because she was too eager, she faltered on a step that should have been a graceful, flowing turn. Her footing slipped, and her body swayed visibly, though she tried desperately to cover it up. Several stifled chuckles escaped from the guests. She immediately lost her composure, and the rest of her dance fell into complete disarray. She ended it hastily, returning to her seat with a face as white as a sheet. When it came time for me to perform, Shen Shuyu's venomous gaze never left me. The dance I offered the Grand Empress Dowager was called Startled Swan. As my water sleeves flew through the air, the entire hall fell into silence. Just as she turned, Shen Shuyu, seated among the guests, suddenly raised her hand and, without a sound, snapped the pearl necklace from her own neck. Perfectly round pearls scattered and rolled across the floor in an instant. Her toe touched one of those slick, round beads, and her body pitched sharply. When their eyes met, Shen Shuyu curled her lips in a triumphant little smirk. In the span of a lightning flash, she went with the momentum, leaning into the fall. Her water sleeves swept across the ground like drifting clouds, and she executed a perfectly timed low dip. Then, with a light tap of her toe, she sidestepped the scattered pearls and followed with 3 rapid, spinning turns. The entire sequence flowed like water, as if it had always been part of the dance. The hall fell silent for a single breath, then erupted in thunderous applause. The smugness on Shen Shuyu's face hadn't even faded before it froze solid. To avoid drawing suspicion, she hastily dropped to her knees, her voice trembling. This daughter deserves death. This necklace somehow snapped on its own, disturbing the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet. I beg the Empress Dowager's forgiveness. The Empress Dowager cast a sidelong glance at her, her gaze as calm and unreadable as an ancient well. She neither rebuked her nor bade her rise. Instead, she turned to her, clapping her hands softly with a light laugh, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes brimming with approval. Excellent. Composure in the face of crisis, that reveals true character. She lowered her head and smiled. A touch shy. An official seated nearby, one who had never gotten along with her father, stroked his beard and chuckled. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried just far enough for those around to hear. Lord Shen, your 2 daughters truly are, one a radiant moon in the heavens, and the other, well, quite the contrast, isn't it? Every guest in the hall was sharp as a blade. Who couldn't see that the pearl snapping was anything but accidental? The Empress Dowager's attitude said it all. Not calling it out was the greatest courtesy, and also the greatest humiliation. Her father's face turned a deep, livid green in an instant, yet he had no room to argue. He could only force a strained, awkward smile. Beside him, Xia Zhaoyan seemed utterly oblivious to everything that had just happened. He held his wine cup in his hand, his gaze locked firmly on her. Midway through the banquet, she slipped away alone to the rear garden for some air. The night breeze was cool, but it couldn't blow away the heaviness in her chest. Familiar footsteps sounded behind her. Xia Zhaoyan's voice came through the moonlight, lower than usual. What you did just now. You danced beautifully. She didn't turn around, her voice flat and calm. Thank you, young Marquis. He was silent for a moment, then drew a familiar bamboo flute from his sleeve, the one she had made for him with her own hands on his birthday last year. His tone carried a hint of cautious hope. Qingli, could you dance for me alone once more, just like before? That's impossible. Those 3 words landed like stones. Xia Zhaoyan's face drained of color inch by inch, but a thread of hope still clung to his eyes. I don't believe you feel nothing for me anymore. He stepped forward, his voice edged with panic. Qingli, if I told you that the one I've always loved in my heart is you, would you believe me? I only felt guilty toward Shuyu. I feared she might do something foolish in this life too, so I thought I'd marry her for now. But now I understand. All that did was push you further away. His eyes reddened. I regret it. Please don't marry the crown prince. Can we spend our lives together like in the last life? Please. She laughed as if she'd just heard the most absurd joke. Spend our lives together. She wrenched her hand free from Xia Zhaoyan's attempt to grab it, her chest heaving violently. Even though she fought to steady herself, her voice still trembled with barely contained sobs. In the last life, you kept saying you owed Shen Shuyu something. But did you ever think about what you owed your wife and your child? Do you have any idea how hard it was for me to raise Nien'er alone after you abandoned us and rode off to the border? When he caught a fever and it wouldn't break, he cried in his sleep, calling for his father. That child never understood. To the very end. Why his own father couldn't bear to look at him even once from the day he was born. Tears blurred her vision as she stared at his suddenly pale face. Xia Zhaoyan, you are, through and through, a worthless man. You're always chasing what you can't have. And you never learn to cherish the person right in front of you. Loving you once, I must have been blind. The word struck him like a thunderbolt. He staggered, then sank to the ground, his eyes hollow, as if every ounce of strength had been drained from him. From a distance, a familiar voice called softly, Qingli. Song Sui stood there, holding a lantern, his dark cloak stirring gently in the wind. Without a moment's hesitation, she walked toward him, never once looking back at the man behind her. On the day she married, she wore a phoenix coronet and bridal robes, the hall ablaze with festive red. Her maids were helping her prepare to step out the door when a commotion erupted from outside. Xia Zhaoyan burst in, dressed in full battle armor, the morning dew still clinging damp to his pauldrons. She instinctively stepped back half a pace, eyeing him warily. What do you want? But he only stood where he was, his gaze greedily tracing over her wedding attire. His eyes shot through with red. Qingli. His voice was hoarse, rough. You look just as beautiful in your wedding dress as you always did. He gave a bitter smile, a glint of tears at the corners of his eyes. It's a pity, this time, I'm not the groom. Seeing her still on guard, he took a deep breath, then slowly stepped back half a pace, putting distance between them. I'm sorry. Those two words seemed to cost him every last shred of strength. For my arrogance back then. For the pain I caused you. For all of it. His gaze swept over her features one final time, as if he wanted to etch this moment into his very soul. I wish you peace and joy from this day on, with your children at your knees. With that, he turned and walked away without hesitation, the clink of his armor fading into the celebratory clamor of drums and gongs. She watched that unsteady figure retreat, and suddenly, she remembered the last life. The same red candles burning bright. He had held the ceremonial scale and gently lifted her embroidered bridal veil. The candlelight danced in his smiling eyes as he said, Qingli, I, Xia Zhaoyan, will never betray you in this life. The sincerity in his eyes then, and the desolation of his departure now, wove together beneath the flood of red silk like a dream from another lifetime. Just as in the last life, Xia Zhaoyan volunteered to lead troops stationed at the border, never to return to the capital. Shen Shuyu refused to go with him to the frontier and endure a hard life there, and so their engagement was dissolved. Her father selected another match for her, the second young master of the Duke of Zhengguo's household. But given Shen Shuyu's status as a concubine-born daughter, she could only enter as a secondary wife. Word had it that the primary wife was a formidable woman. After Shen Shuyu entered that household, she was tormented day after day. Within less than a month, she was crying and begging her father to take her back home. Though my father had once favored me, when true interest was at stake, he ultimately chose to stand by and watch, leaving me to wither or flourish alone in that vast, cold manor. Years turned, and the court shifted with them. The earl's mansion, once bathed in glory, slowly crumbled into decline. Then my father was stripped of his title, dragged into the corruption case of the grain transport. That day, snow fell in thick, relentless sheets. He staggered to his knees on the long stone steps before the eastern palace, his graying hair crusted with frost. A palace attendant held an umbrella over my head, shielding me from the snow, and murmured that he had been kneeling out there for 3 hours already. I stood beneath the eaves, gazing at that figure curled against the wind and snow. I remembered how, when my mother lay sick on her deathbed, he had insisted on bringing his mistress back into the house. How he had casually tossed my mother's keepsakes to his concubine-born daughter, and how he had looked on coldly during my hardest days. In the end, I left behind 2 words, I will not see you, and walked away without a single glance back. After I married Song Sui, we held each other up through everything, our bond deep and true. When he ascended the throne, he left the 6 palaces empty, standing only beside me. Years later, on a snowy night, candlelight flickered softly. He finished reviewing the last memorial, then gently took my hand. Qingli, he said, his voice low. In my past life, I also stood below the challenge platform. My fingertips trembled, and I looked at him in disbelief. But I was too weak back then. I could only watch as you donned the phoenix crown and bridal robes for him. Watch as you wept alone in the depths of that courtyard. His palm was warm, carefully wrapping around my chilled fingers. So in this life, I swore I would make you happy. I looked into his still bright eyes and smiled, returning his grip. You did. Outside the window, the snow fell without a sound. Inside the hall, the years stretched quiet and peaceful. In this life, we had not failed each other after all.